Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. I would just want to make sure people have a chance to get in here and get their audio preferences settled. All right, so in the interest of time, we'll get started here. Welcome to today's webinar. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the country. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few technical things with this platform in case you haven't joined us for a webinar before. This is very similar to Zoom meeting with a few exceptions. The first and most noticeable of which is that your cameras and microphones are disabled by default. So you don't have to worry about being seen or interrupting the presenters today, but it does mean that you're limited to text interaction with each other and with the presenters. So the two options there are chat and Q&A. We're going to strongly prefer that you ask any questions at any point during the presentation in the Q&A because we can make sure that those are addressed in a more systematic way. If you have any discussion or comment or anything like that, you can put those in the chat. Just make sure if you want everyone to see it that you select everyone from the drop-down menu. So with that, I'd like to hand it off to today's moderator, Bridget Moran.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So excited that you all are able to join us today for this presentation and conversation. So thought we could begin off with a round of introductions. So hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Moran. I'm our content manager here at Coursedog. So doing all things content and research related. Have been with the company for about a year or so now. Before that was previously with EAB doing best practice research. So really excited to be here with you all today having this discussion and want to pass it over to Frank now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Blalark. I'm the AVP and University Registrar at Duke. Prior to being at Duke, I've also been the Registrar at Purdue, and I was the Director of the Office of the Registrar at the University of Minnesota. So I've had some experiences kind of across a broad scope of institutions, and hopefully I can share some ideas that apply to your institutions as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank. Well, let's go ahead and quickly run through the agenda and an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll first start off talking about some of the barriers that currently exist when it comes to curriculum and what's really preventing institutions from being able to quickly and effectively propose, review, and approve that new curriculum. Next, we'll talk about some of the practices that institutions can adopt to help them more quickly and flexibly differentiate their curriculum. We'll talk about what this means in terms of curriculum processes, program reviews, and the catalog. And then finally, we'll talk about some of the current trends we're seeing that relate to student demand and the increased need for institutions to quickly adapt and change their curriculum. And of course, we'll also leave time for questions as well. Please go ahead and feel free to submit those throughout the presentation in the Q&A function, and we'll definitely get to those. And also wanted to let you all know we will be conducting a few polls throughout today's session as well. So we're really looking forward to getting your perspectives on these topics and learn about what curriculum practices look like at your institution. So before we get into things, I want to quickly set the stage and make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to what we're talking about when we refer to managing and changing curriculum. When I think of managing curricular changes at an institution, I really think it comes down to two of these major buckets that you'll see here on the slide. First, keeping a curriculum inventory. I often hear from administrators that faculty and staff don't always know how or where to find the most recent and accurate list of courses and programs offered. A faculty member may go pull a paper volume off a shelf located in the hallway to look up a certain course. However, this printed book may actually be from several years ago and no longer contains the most updated information. Second, we'll be talking about all the processes that go into making changes to the curriculum, whether this is proposing a new course or program or modifying an existing course or program. To make these changes happen, faculty and staff have to go through the process of proposing, reviewing, approving, and then of course, publishing that new curriculum. So now that hopefully we're all on the same page here, let's dive into what our main topics are going to be for the day. So for this first section here, we'll be talking about the fact that we know that oftentimes many of the current curriculum processes today don't work in a way that really supports our institutional needs. And we're going to take a look at, why this is the case. We'll also look at satisfaction with current processes and what some of these breakdowns look like. Specifically, we'll look at how the program review process plays into this and how students are able to access curricular updates. Earlier this year, we partnered with University Business to examine the challenges that institutions face when it comes to running their academic operations. And this specifically looked at what's that meant for curriculum processes as well. The results show that institutions are overwhelmingly really unenthused with their processes when it comes to both modifying existing curriculum and approving new curriculum. Very few institutions are very satisfied with their abilities to manage either of these processes. Rather, 7 out of 10 institutions reported that they were either somewhat satisfied or somewhat dissatisfied with these processes. While very few institutions reported that they were very unsatisfied, I think we have to ask ourselves, can we afford to really be running processes that only somewhat meet our needs and our ability to serve students? So Frank, I know this is something that you've spent a lot of time thinking about. I would love to hear about, how is Duke rethinking their curriculum processes? Can you tell me a little bit about, why you chose to reevaluate these processes and what were some of the pain points that you were experiencing?
Yeah, so here at Duke, sure, with many other schools, we experienced a few different challenges related to not just the curriculum workflow process, but also curricular updates. How do people update curricula? How do students know and understand where the curricula can be updated? And as many folks turn over within the collegiate units in our decentralized environment, people forgot what the curriculum processes were. So without established standardized workflows, folks were just making changes on websites, creating new PDFs with requirements and just putting them up on web pages. And the degree audits weren't always updated. So as we went around at Duke, we have 10 different schools. We kind of spoke to all the different schools and came to understand that we really need a curricular ecosystem. And for us, what that means is one process is validating requirements. So meeting with the different departments to validate what their degree requirements actually are. For some, they haven't been documented at all. Another piece of that is figuring out how to get those requirements into the degree audit applications. Then we look toward the Coursedog application to start developing the better curriculum workflows. And it's not just emails flowing back and forth or Qualtrics forms flowing back and forth. And then while it's the front end of some process, for us, it's actually the back end, getting all of that information out to the bulletin. So similar to other schools, we do look at the bulletin and the requirements for external compliance purposes, but also for students to look at, these are your degree requirements for the year that you started your academic program here at Duke. So it's really helpful for us to get those out to students in their admitting year, as well as in the degree audit, and then sync those up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like, without that standardized workflow, when you have 10 schools, I'm sure, new folks coming in all the time, there's just a lot of opportunity for breakdown there. Awesome. Well, as we talked about in the last slide, we know that a lot of administrators are unsatisfied with curriculum processes, but I think that begs the question, where are these breakdowns actually occurring? I think like Frank mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities for this. And I know that the curriculum process varies institution to institution, but I sketched out an example here of just, one of the ways an institution might have to go through a curricular change process. So I know for some institutions, it might be fewer steps, it might be more steps, but you'll see, at least in the case of this slide, once a curricular change is proposed, it has to move through 8 steps internally before it can begin the external review process. So that's 8 opportunities for the proposed change to get stuck at a certain step or delayed. And without a centralized system or accountability, I think it's really no wonder that it takes so long for curricular changes to get approved. And I know some people might push back and say, there are external forces like state approval processes, accreditation processes, financial processes. But when I was talking to a former provost about this, and I brought up this point, and she told me, yes, that's true. I know that there's a lot going on externally, but the part that I can own, the part that's inside my institution, I want to make sure that that's as short and streamlined as possible, because we know that it involves a lot of people inside of an institution to get all of this done. And challenges in the curricular process often manifest themselves in the three areas laid out on this slide. First, transparency and accountability. With curricular changes moving through paper forms, emails, spreadsheets, Qualitrix, who knows, faculty and staff that submitted original curricular changes often don't even know what stage of the approval process it's in. And this isn't only frustrating, but it also prevents faculty from knowing who to reach out to and what stage it's in. The second and third challenges listed here, I think, are really closely intertwined. As we mentioned earlier, curricular changes can often take up to a year or two, and changes might span extended periods in each stage, which lengthens the overall time to decision. This lengthy process is often due to deadline challenges that institutions face. In some cases, there may not be any deadlines, or the deadlines aren't enforced. Due to the lack of transparency and disparate methods of moving curricular changes from one step to the next, no one knows how long these changes have been in each stage and when they're supposed to move to the next stage. So as you can see, these challenges really feed into each other and can lead to a vicious cycle that lacks accountability and drags out the whole process. And I think a lot of what we've discussed on this slide has to do with building efficient workflows and strong practices for data collection. So Frank, I'd love for you to weigh in here. Can you talk about what this means to you and how you approach managing curricular changes with the decentralized operations that you have at Duke?
Yeah, so here at Duke, not just having a heavily decentralized process is complicated, but another layer above it is, depending on the major you're trying to propose changes for, that can go to a different committee. So for example, in our School of Engineering, undergraduate majors go to committee one, graduate school majors, Master of Science, PhDs go to a different committee, and then professional degrees go to yet a different committee. So not only can the workflows help us track where things are in the process, it also helps the School of Engineering better understand, depending on which major they're referring to or they want to update, there are different rules. So depending on the committee, there could be rules for minor updates versus major updates, and they're not always the same across the board. For professional programs, what might be considered minor could be a switch out of a program or a course requirement, but in the undergraduate side, that might be considered a major change. So developing those workflows that we can codify many of those rules into a workflow and not just tracking down the person who knows where the policy is written down is really helpful. The other piece on our side is we're trying to better allow other parties into the process that need the information. So the bulletin is one group of folks that need that information to update the bulletin. The department, of course, is another party, curriculum committee is another party, but also our degree audit folks. So right now, as new changes come in, sometimes what goes to the committee is not always what goes to the degree audit folks. It may not also be what goes to the communications folks. So once we get things approved, we'll then triage and send out tributaries of the information to different parties. So it's really helpful to synchronize and get folks on the same page to present the same information about programs.
Definitely, that makes a lot of sense. It certainly sounds like there are a lot of moving parts to deal with. Great. Well, I'd love to kick off our first poll question and hear from folks in the audience about, how they're seeing some of these inefficiencies play out at their institution. So we'll leave the poll open for about 60 seconds or so. So feel free to go ahead and select any of these choices that resonate with you. All right, we'll leave it open for just a little bit longer. So if you haven't had a chance to put in your response, feel free to go ahead and select those options now.
I always forget to cue up the Jeopardy music for these.
All right, well, let's go ahead and close the poll now and we can share the results with everyone. Okay, interesting. So it looks like we have a couple that rose to the top here. It looks like about 2/3 of you said that it's difficult to enforce deadlines or they might not even be established. And then paper processes. Yes, that's a big one that we hear, requiring, physical handoffs, a lot of manual data entry. I know that that can be very painful. And then it looks like a couple of folks here about transparency and making sure individuals and committees are all on the same page here. Frank, do any of these answers here really jump out at you?
Yeah, I think the two that jump out for everyone else. So the paper process, as I mentioned before, we do have Qualtrics forms for narrative or text data that go into the bulletin now, but there's always a bunch of attachments that need to go along with it. Sometimes those get sent over in the mail. Sometimes those get uploaded by PDF. And also deadlines, as I mentioned before, with different committees, depending on the major you're referring to, they might have different deadlines. So we try to get to a consistent set of deadlines, and what we find is that it might work for all undergraduate majors, but it might be a completely different deadline for grad and professional majors that do have different admission cycles. So that one is that does also resonate with folks here at Duke. Great.
All right, well, let's move on to everyone's favorite topic now, program reviews. I know, for being honest, this is a pretty unpleasant process for most folks, and they're often a really big burden to conduct, right? Folks might see them as punitive rather than an opportunity for growth. And I think aside from that, though, the way they're actually conducted doesn't actually accomplish the intended outcomes that we're looking for. To start, they happen infrequently. At some institutions, they can be as far apart as 5 to 10 years. And this means that realistically, these reviews can't keep up with the changing pace of student and employer expectations. Aside from the frequency, the process itself is also often flawed. Program reviews often might be staggered, so performance across programs can't be compared at the same time. And this really prevents institutions from getting a holistic view of program performance and evaluating what this means for needed curricular changes. Additionally, metrics can often be subjective and vary across different programs. Different programs might be judged differently depending on some of these varying standards. And at worst, when the metrics are difficult to access, programs might be evaluated based on vague qualitative metrics. So this really isn't helpful for anyone. So in the next section, we'll look at a little bit about how this process can be improved. So I want to shift gears here and talk a little bit about the connection between the curriculum and the catalog, or some institutions might refer to it as the bulletin. Ideally, once new curricular offerings are approved, it is then entered into the newest version of the catalog. This new catalog is then published and students are able to see the new offerings. Faculty and staff also use the catalog to access and evaluate offerings. So this sounds simple enough, right? But I'm sure for many of us on the line, we know that it really never is that simple. Too often, newly approved offerings sit in limbo for long periods of time before actually getting pushed into the catalog. And this goes back to the transparency aspect we talked about earlier, where folks don't know which stage the curriculum changes in and if it's been approved yet. In other cases, the curriculum process may not line up with when the catalog is published. In the survey I referenced earlier with University Business, it found that 1 in 5 respondents reported that the catalog at their institution does not accurately reflect courses offered, program requirements, and other policies. I think this is bound to happen when the catalog is often more regulated than the curricular change process. I was looking at a recent survey that found that 84% of institutions publish their catalog once a year, yet almost half of these same institutions allow unlimited course changes, and over a third allow unlimited program changes throughout the year. So given this, I think it's really no wonder that curricular changes don't always line up with when they need to be published in the catalog. And as a result, there may not be enough time between publishing the catalog and advertising new offerings to students, so they're able to discover them and actually enroll in those offerings. So I think this really begs the question, why is it really critical to make sure that the curriculum and catalog processes are aligned? And Frank, I would love for you to, kind of give your thoughts here. I know we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but would love to hear from you how you, manage the workflow and the process between, actually getting those curricular updates into the catalog.
So for us, it's less about courses because we do have a public catalog that's pushed right out of our student information system. But what we do find invariably every year, something was approved in the summer, something was approved in a term, and they forgot to send it over. So you get new curriculum chairs where they vote and they're done. And you find out right before the start of the term, someone sends an email and asks, why can't students apply for this major? Why can't they be admitted into a major? And then we look around and find out no one ever sent it to us because they just voted in-house, approved it, and it's sitting in a drive folder somewhere to think that it's done. So this will help not only us, but also departments to go to one place to handle all of their curriculum edits and approvals, better define their processes, and help us all track what is coming up in the upcoming year. We do understand there will be changes throughout the year. There will be courses that are no longer offered that might appear in the bulletin, but at least we can get to the same spot where people are looking at curricular updates and changes and have consistent workflows so that we don't miss new majors that are supposed to be offered. And then students are we've had situations where students are in major 1 because they're waiting on major 2 to be created, and then we have to change them over once everyone gets on the same page.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Great. Well, let's go ahead and move into our next section here where we'll talk about some of the practices we can use to actually address some of the challenges that we've discussed. So first, we'll look at the importance of establishing consistency across where your curricular offerings are displayed. Next, we'll look at the importance of integrating the curriculum process and how these processes feed into each other. And then finally, we'll return to everyone's favorite topic of program reviews. So I think it's no surprise that curriculum lives in multiple places that students access. And the same could be said for how curriculum manifests itself across an institution. Proposing a curricular change is really just the first stage in its life cycle. We've spent a lot of time today talking about, what it actually takes to propose, evaluate, and approve those new curricular offerings. However, it doesn't stop there. Once a new curricular offering is approved, it needs to be pushed into the newest version of the catalog so students, faculty, and staff can access it. The registrar's office and department schedulers also need to be able to access this up-to-date curriculum to know which courses to schedule so students can actually, access and enroll in those newly offered courses and or programs. From there, the new curricular offering should hopefully be evaluated at regular intervals to monitor success and what, if anything, needs to be changed. Once a needed change is identified, it then starts this whole process all over again. But unsurprisingly, this amount of coordination can lead to breakdowns in the process beyond just reviewing and approving those curricular changes. And as we've discussed, curricular offerings don't live in a vacuum, and they certainly don't live in just one place. I think the catalog is the first place that many of us think of when we think about where we house our curricular offerings and program maps. The catalog represents that public contract between the institution and the student for the requirements and policies that students need to follow to successfully complete their degree. This is important, but there are also a couple of other places that students may be accessing their course and program information. I think the website is a big one here. So students are likely to do a Google search for what they're looking for before navigating from an institution's homepage in search of the information. The website also serves as an advertising tool for prospective students considering your institution and potential programs. And finally, if your institution uses a student degree planner tool, this is where students go to plan their schedule for upcoming terms. This is where they chart out their course and create a plan that makes the most sense for them. It's key that all three of these mediums present the same information to prevent confusion and make sure that students don't get off track or take any unproductive credits. So Frank, again, I'd love for you to weigh in here and talk about how these curriculum workflows are connected and why it's important that students are able to see the same information in each place that they go to.
Yeah, sure. So from the curriculum or the administrative side, there's a couple workflows that usually are gotchas for institutions, and it involves when there's new academic programs, and at the same time, there might be new course subjects that need to be added. So you propose a new program that your institution has never had, and also new subjects that the institution has never had. And if those workflows get out of sync, you get into this vicious cycle of, I can't approve the program because it doesn't have courses, but I can't approve and implement the courses if the program's not approved. So by having some synchronized workflows, we can cross over from the curriculum and the courses committee, which they're different sometimes, and let them know that this curriculum proposal is pending. And once the courses have been reviewed, we can move forward with the new major. Now, for the student perspective, as you mentioned before, we have different populations of stakeholders looking at our curricula. And one big group are the pre-matriculation students. We find that some students, depending on the program, might look at your institution for brand name. A lot of students will also look at your institution for the curriculum. So they'll look to see when they're comparing close institutions and programs to look at what offerings, course offerings each curriculum has. And that can be challenging if you're like us a few years ago, that's in a hard copy bulletin. It's really a hardback bulletin, or if it's throughout websites. So the nice thing about this is it allows us, even though we have 10 different URLs, it allows people to go through and look at different program offerings, not just for descriptions of the program, but also what courses that they offer. So we have students that will come specifically for courses taught by certain faculty in different areas of research. The other thing we hope is to have less of a need for schools to have their information on a website. So we have started working with departments that have admitted, now that we have better tools online, they are more than willing to take down their website and point students over toward an online facing curriculum once the requirements are all there and set and approved. And then for the degree planner, our process is a little bit cart then horse. So we go through the curriculum process and then go straight to the student degree planner because we feel it's best to get that accurate before it gets published out to the catalog, instead of going to the catalog, then over to the degree planner. And from that perspective, as you mentioned before, many people will look at the catalog in their admissions year as the truth, or those are the requirements that they're expected to meet when they were admitted. So they'll look at that as almost like a contractual in nature. And then we make sure the degree planner matches. So because we start with a degree planner and go back to the catalog, we know that it's going to match instead of going one way over the other. So for us, those workflows are really helpful, both administratively and in terms of prospective and current students, so that everyone can go to the same place. And we also know if something goes awry, where to go to make the updates. And we're not going to different documents or different websites to make them multiple times.
Yeah, I love that. That's really great. Well, let's go ahead and move into our second poll here. Again, would love to hear from you all about where you're most frequently seeing breakdowns in your curriculum process. I know we have just a single choice here, so whichever one you think is most urgent in terms of what needs to be addressed at your institution. All right, we'll keep it open for another few seconds. So if you haven't had a chance, make sure that you go ahead and select your choice here. All right, let's go ahead and share the poll results now. Okay, interesting. We had one coming up at the top here, keeping the curriculum review and approval process moving along quickly. Yeah, I think that resonates really well with what we've been talking about today, with just, the number of steps that are involved, and then also the number of different avenues, whether, like Frank said, it's through a Qualtrics survey, an email, a paper sheet. I think just using all of those different methods instead of having one centralized place can certainly drag this out. Frank, any thoughts here?
Yeah, same here. We do have the dreaded someone saying, I thought I sent that over to you, or we approved that last year. Why doesn't it appear? This will definitely help to track anything that has not been submitted through the work, or anything that has been submitted through the workflow, so that we know that it's been submitted, been approved, and we can move forward with our processes. And it's not trapped somewhere in a black box, and then the committee chair has moved on to some sabbatical or another institution.
Definitely. Okay, great. So for the final part of this section, I want to quickly go back to program reviews. I know that often this is a painful process that occurs infrequently. So this means that curriculum is rarely evaluated, and updates aren't considered maybe quite as regularly as they should be. However, this infrequent process really is no longer serving the needs of students and institutions. So recently I was talking with Dr. Kara Monroe, and she's the former provost at Ivy Tech Community College. And she was telling me that she hopes to make the program review process more evaluative and growth oriented, rather than being seen as required and punitive, which is how a lot of people see it right now. I think the 6 elements laid out on this slide provide a really helpful approach when it comes to program reviews that can help them just be a little bit easier for everyone in reality. So rather than conducting program reviews, say, every 5 to 10 years, annual evaluations can help provide more frequent opportunities to gather feedback. The program reviews should also be easier for everyone to conduct. Rather than expecting everyone to chase down data from multiple sources across campus, program leaders and administrators should be able to pull a set of agreed upon metrics from just one place. This means that they don't need any specialized expertise to, run queries or ask someone else to run the analysis, but they can actually easily access that data themselves with little technical expertise. As I just mentioned, the data points should also be agreed upon and standardized for all units, so programs feel like they aren't being held to a different set of standards from others. The number of data points requested should also be a reasonable number. An endless list of metrics increases the burden to conduct the review and makes it more difficult to determine which metrics are actually important to evaluate. Next, there should be transparency about how the determined metrics will actually be evaluated. So it helps increase trust and make the process more objective. And finally, there should be some benchmarks set in advance about what types of results warrant further curriculum evaluation. Without benchmarks, too often these curriculum reviews result in vague recommendations that end up yielding little change. So for our last section today, we're going to finish out by looking at some of the factors that are making it even more critical for institutions to be able to keep their curriculum relevant to the needs of student and employers. We'll look at the pace that skills are changing in the labor market, how student preferences are changing, and new pressures that institutions face when it comes to their curricula. And finally, we'll look at how new curriculum requirements play into all of this. So beyond the frustration that administrators face when it comes to managing these changes, which we just talked about at length, I think it's also important to consider how students are impacted by these inefficient processes. We asked higher ed leaders in the same university business survey how inefficiencies in academic operations impacted students, and curriculum ranked as the #1 factor of all of these that impacted students. So about 6 in 10 respondents reported that students at their institutions were unaware of changes to the curriculum that may impact them. This is pretty alarming considering curriculum requirements determine which courses students can register for and whether they've met the requirements for completion. I really love the quote on this slide by Dr. Kara Monroe. We've talked with Kara a lot about the importance of keeping curriculum relevant, particularly institutions like hers in the two-year space that are so closely aligned with the local community and workforce. Kara thinks about it such that your curriculum is really your product catalog. This is what you sell to students, employers, the state, and even your board of directors or trustees. And I think this is true to some extent for really any institution. While I know that many are hesitant to think of the value of higher education as a product, this is how many external stakeholders actually see it. So let's take a look at some of the forces that are currently informing curriculum development. I think when most folks think about changing and updating the curriculum, they likely think about changing skills in the workforce, and this is for a good reason. Lightcast, formerly known as MZ Burning Class, just put out a new report, and it highlights some pretty fascinating information about the rate at which skills are changing across the labor market. Lightcast found in their analysis that since 2016, there was a 37% change in skills and job postings. So this means that about a third of any given job posting looks different than it did 5 to 6 years ago. They also found that 20% or 1 in 5 skills listed in job postings were entirely new to the job posting compared to the same one in 2016. This rate of change is pretty interesting when you think about how programs and courses are or maybe aren't changed within the same time period. This quote at the bottom of the slide you'll see here is from one of our partners, Dr. Jill Wright. She was the former AVP of Accreditation Assessment and Academic Services at Illinois Central College. She noted that oftentimes by the time a new program is launched, it's already too late. An institution may realize after a couple of years of new labor market trends that a program needs to be modified. Then, it might take another 1 to 2 years to actually modify and implement that newly updated curriculum. By that time, job requirements have already changed again. I think it's also important to realize that these changes in skills aren't just limited to particular sectors. I think when a lot of us think of changing skills, we immediately think of, software developers learning new programming languages or data scientists finding new ways to analyze data. And while this may be true, they certainly aren't the only ones who are learning new skills and adapting to changing expectations and needs. The data on this slide is from the same Lightcast study that I just mentioned, and it shows the percentage change between 2016 and 2021 of the top 20 skills by different fields. You'll see that 33% of the top 20 requested skills for IT professionals changed between 2016 and 2021. But the percentage change was the same or greater for 5 of the other fields highlighted here. So for example, 35% of the top 20 skills requested for HR professionals changed during that same time period. So to give you an idea of what this looks like in reality, let's take, for example, the job of marketing specialists. Social media and digital marketing skills became more in demand, while market research and customer contact skills decreased in demand during the same time period. However, new skills also popped up that were rarely requested in 2016. This includes Facebook, Salesforce, Google Analytics, and content management. So there's a lot of ways to slice and dice all of this data, but I think overall it points to the fact that skills are changing across the labor market and not just in certain sectors. And we know that what's happening in the job market is going to impact student demand. Whether we like to admit it or not, getting a good job is consistently the top reason students report that they choose to enroll in post-secondary education. The motivation to find a good job doesn't just impact students' intentions to enroll in higher ed, but also what program they choose. You can see the trend lines on this slide show the number of degrees conferred between 2009-2010 and 2018-2019 based on the program area. Certain programs like those in the health professions and engineering have been consistently climbing, while others in areas such as social science and history have seen a decline in the number of degrees conferred. So these are definitely macro trends and don't take into account certain geographic trends or trends within each field, but I think they paint a pretty clear picture that a shift is occurring. Also note that due to the notoriously slow reporting by iPads, this data doesn't show trends from the past 2 years and how the pandemic has impacted student program choice. We could probably spend all day delving into this and examining student preferences from a variety of angles, but I also want to look at some of the external factors that are impacting the direction of curriculum. I think it's no secret that institutions are under pressure to differentiate themselves from others in higher ed. We actually recently partnered with Inside Higher Ed to run a series about revamping curriculum management. They showcase articles that highlight how some institutions are approaching rethinking their curricula. And you can see some of the examples on this slide here. While some smaller institutions are maybe taking more dramatic approaches and reorienting their whole curricula around new themes, others are hiring faculty with new expertise or introducing new programs. We know there are several reasons why we're seeing these changes happen across the sector. I think by now, no one needs to be reminded of the coming demographic cliff projected by Nathan Graw, which some say will only come sooner due to the pandemic. This reduction in the population of traditional age students has increased competition among institutions for these students. Simultaneously, our definition of what a quote unquote traditional student looks like is changing. Students are more likely to be older, have a job, come from low-income families or communities of color. With this comes different expectations from students about what they're actually seeking from higher ed. And all of this should be informing, how we're thinking about our curriculum offerings and how they're meeting student needs. So before we get to our Q&A section, I want to quickly touch on some of the different requirements that are also impacting our curricular offerings. I'm sure, as most of you are very well aware, institutions have to navigate several layers of requirements when it comes to offering approved curricular offerings. This will vary institution to institution and state by state, but we know that program and course development certainly don't live in a vacuum. Many institutions set their own requirements in areas such as what courses constitute a general education, to what extent students should be required to take liberal arts courses, and any other topic-specific requirements. This may be required courses on topics related to things such as DEI, civics, or other areas. States also set requirements, and this is particularly important for institutions that serve students intending to transfer to another institution within the state. In states with multiple systems, this may mean meeting different requirements. For example, community colleges may have to be aware of requirements for transfers within different state systems. So for example, the California State University or the University of California. Finally, we're all aware of the importance of accreditation requirements. These requirements may come from the institution's accreditor or program-specific accreditors such as ABET. For some more technical or profession-specific programs, they also may have to consider courses that students need to complete before even being accepted into that program, such as nursing. So I don't think any of these requirements are really new to any of us, but we do have to consider how our curriculum processes either enable us or hinder us from being able to comply with these requirements. So I know that was a lot of talking by me, so I'm going to pass it over to one of my colleagues now, Claire, and she is going to talk a little bit more about how Coursedog can help you all address some of these areas we just discussed.
Thank you, Bridget. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'd like to just give you a quick overview of how we at Coursedog can help you and your institution maintain that single source of truth and optimize your curriculum process. So our mission is to break down barriers to opportunity for students through our integrated academic operations. And so in our operations platform, you can not only create and manage your whole curriculum, such as your courses and programs. To do that, you can create customized forms and approval workflows that facilitate an efficient, visible, and accurate curriculum approval process. Then that most up-to-date data gets displayed on a modern, institution-branded, and student-centric online catalog in real time. Throughout that process, you can manage your curriculum data more easily thanks to our bidirectional integration with your SIS. Now, with your curriculum at the center of that process, the course catalog really becomes your single source of truth for faculty, students, and advising teams' academic planning, as well as administrators' one-stop shop for accreditation documentation. Now, in our platform, you're also able to schedule courses using our academic scheduling tool, as well as events using our event scheduling tool, which takes into account things such as faculty preferences and standard meeting patterns to help you create an optimal schedule. Now, throughout this entire process, you can leverage reports and predictive analytics to make informed decisions. And all of this happens in a user-friendly, easy-to-use platform, which really facilitates adoption of a new tool, and also that seamlessly reads and pushes data back to your student information system to really allow you to focus on student success.
Awesome.
So,
thanks, Claire. that was super helpful. A great overview. Great. Well, it looks like we have just over 10 minutes for Q&A here. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to go ahead and submit that in the Q&A function, and we'll get to those. So I'll give everyone a couple seconds to gather their thoughts, and if anything arises, please feel free to go ahead and put that in the Q&A function. All right, not seeing any questions come in just yet, but we will leave it open for another minute or two, and if not, we will give everyone a couple minutes back in their day. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions here right now, but if anyone does have questions, we will be sending the deck out after this, which has my contact information. But to wrap up, we just want to do one final poll here, just a quick yes or no, if folks are interested in learning more, just for our own internal information here. So we will leave this open for a little bit and then let everyone get on their way, and hopefully a few minutes to grab some water, grab a snack before your next meeting. All right, well, I think that's it for us, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, and want to give a special thank you to Frank for joining us today. I know you have a very busy schedule, but I think everyone really appreciated hearing your insights today. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day.